You always want to be on the Zoom side because this is where you can engage with us in the chat. But we're putting some stuff on YouTube for helping us out with the recording side. So let me get that set up here. And then I want to read Brendan's bio. It's an amazing one. So for those that do not know him, you're going to want to know this. Brendan is a mental and metabolic health researcher, functional medicine practitioner, and educator, writer, and speaker. He's a board certified holistic health practitioner, master nutrition coach, master personal trainer, USAW sports performance coach, and CrossFit trainer. He began his career as a personal trainer and nutrition coach at the age of 18 after disappointingly being medically discharged from the United States Navy SEAL training pipeline due to an injury. After being exposed to the power of functional lab testing in the start of his career, he began intensely pursuing that, as I can vouch for the intensely, as a career path, which has led him to be widely regarded as one of the top leading experts in metabolic health and functional education. He's the proud owner and founder of the Metabolic Solutions Institute for Functional Health and Fitness Practitioners and the creator of the Functional Mental Health Practitioner Certificate Course, something I'm just super passionate about. We'll touch on that soon, but definitely something I'm really interested in that Brendan does. He's also the founder of the Metabolic Solutions Research and Education Foundation, a not-for-profit foundation dedicated to changing the way the world views mental health through advancing the science of mental health dysfunction. He's also the creator of the Mental Map, that's an acronym, MAP, a cutting-edge lab panel for mental health and the nutraceuticals supplement line. Again, welcome to Summer Open House. But I wanted to read that bio just so people really know who they're talking to here. You've done so much, and who the heck knows what an extra 20, 30, 40 years is going to bring. I do remember, this is hilarious, because you have a mature look, right? You really haven't aged, to be clear. But when I met you, like, probably what, 6, 7, 8 years ago now, I always remember thinking, I'm like, oh, I'm talking to like a guy who's like 35 or whatever. And then I found out you're like a couple years older than me. So how old are you now? Because I'm 29. So what are you, 31, 32?
32, about to be 33, which is kind of weird because I'm so used to being like the 20 something year old and everything. I'm like, oh, I've gotten older.
Yeah, well, no, it's even more impressive, man. And that you're obviously doing something right with the functional medicine because you literally have not, other than maybe even being bigger than you already were, you've looked exactly the same. But just it was the credentials and the status with which you spoke. I just assumed that you were like 10 years past me. And it's just really cool to see what you've been able to do at such a young age. And then again, what the heck is another 20, 30, 40 years going to hold? So let's dive into the topic today, which is mold. If you talk to Brendan long enough, we're going to go on some other things as well. And that's kind of the best part about talking to him. But we're going to try to stay focused on mold. And if you are just tuning in and you have any questions, please feel free to throw them in as we go along. And I'll happily throw in any of the good questions from the chat. So let's start with this. Mold is, I already know this about you, one of the first things that I saw you like wildly passionate about. I know that you love functional medicine in general, but even 6, 7 years ago, when I was getting on the Friday calls, this was definitely a main focal point for Brendan. So why is mold such an important part of your journey? It's not just something that you like to research on. It was something that actually did affect your life. So what happened there that led to you being so passionate about it, man?
Yeah, well, before we dive in, I really appreciate the compliment and to your credit too, man. Like you're right there with me. You're a few years younger, and it's like imagine where we could be in 10 years, 20 years.
Absolutely.
You look at some of the pioneers of this industry, like just at IFM, like Jeffrey Bland is still going. It's like he started IFM and he's still going, he's still rocking it. So longevity, especially in a space that really prioritizes longevity medicine and certainly looking at these root cause factors like mold that can disturb our longevity and age our cells at a deep level. So really appreciate it. And we'll definitely go on some side quests. But I love that first question because it is a very personable thing. And even this course that we're launching was really a long time coming. I've been crafting this material for about the past 7 years or so. And I did kind of have to remember back of like, I've been so deep in the mold space for so long. That's like, how did this all really start again? But for me, really what it was the very, as cliche as the word toxic has become, I was in an extremely toxic, codependent relationship that ended up probably being the most traumatic experience of my whole life, if I'm being candid. And with that particular partner, she developed some sort of mysterious illness while we were together. Now, there were a lot of things wrong with that situation and relationship. I was coming off, suicide attempt and obviously not doing my best, and then finding myself in this really emotionally abusive relationship. that didn't really end well for me. But she got mysteriously sick. And that's really the focal point here because nobody could figure out what was wrong with her. The very first thing we did was go to our conventional doctor, do pretty comprehensive blood work. And that's how I got turned on to MTHFR because in the whole methylation thing, because, in that blood work, it all looked pretty normal. Don't really see anything wrong. But hey, you have this MTHFR thing. So talk about, deep side quest. That's become a big focal point of my career. But, conventional didn't really help. She was medicated. That didn't help. We tried physiotherapy. That didn't help. Chiropractic, naturopathic. So then we were just trying to self-heal and do our own thing. So we were experimenting with supplements and methylation, and we did a parasite protocol together. And, some things kind of maybe got temporary relief from symptoms, but then it almost kind of came back worse. And to speed up the story a little bit, we did live in a water damaged building, which now we know, and I cite it in the course that about 50% of homes in America are water damaged, and it could be more than that, who knows? So, I do a lot of work with different mold inspection groups, like we inspect Brian Carr's company. But that house that we lived in was definitely musty, definitely water damage. But at that point in time, this is like 2014, 2015. I went through FDN in 2016 after I left that relationship. But nobody ever figured out what was wrong with her. Nobody figured out the illness. And just to kind of give everybody an idea of the clinical presentation, right? Because all of us FDNs, we do a very thorough intake. We use the metabolic chaos scorecard and clinical history, and we really do a deep dive to try to understand what are some of the potential hidden stressors that could be driving this person's metabolic chaos. But some of the major symptoms, literally her personality became much more unstable, volatile, like aggressive and dark, if I had to use one word to describe it, but also debilitating fatigue and lethargy and musculoskeletal pain, these cramps that would just like move through her body in kind of a ice pick stabbing pain, all of these weird kind of neurological type symptoms. And she literally wasted away. She got very catabolic and lean. You would have thought she's like overdosing Ozempic or something because she just completely, wasted away to the point that some of her friends and family were whispering about like, what's going on? Is there like an eating disorder? What's happening? And literally to this day, I am the only person on planet Earth that really, she had 3 children, but to this day, I'm the only one that has the insight of what she went through from her illness and nobody being able to help her. And as much as I tried to save her, I was being just emotionally abused way too much. So eventually I left. And in 2020, she ended up taking her life. And so why I say all of this is because to this day, nobody, including myself, figured out what happened to her. But when I went through the FDN program and then got exposed to the concept of mold illness, a lot of things clicked. And so I'm not saying that I know for sure that mold was her root cause and that's what made her sick and ruined our lives or anything. I think it's always multifactorial. There's always a lot of different hidden stressors at play. But I am inclined to this day to think that mold was at least part of it because now, being a guy that just created an advanced course on mold and teaching all over the country about this subject, yeah, as far as the prototypical clinical presentation, her symptoms and presentation really fit the mold illness and SIRS kind of phenotype like to a T. So there for a while, I think that's why I was so niched in mold for a number of years because I kind of had this vendetta against it. I felt like that was the thing that got her and, took her from me and ruined us. But either way, it's such a big root cause subject that we're not even close to getting to the bottom of all of it. And it's crazy to me how the functional medicine world, we've adopted mold illness as a strong paradigm. We talk about it constantly. But from a research perspective or health policy or kind of global epidemiology, I think we're going to see this mold thing continue to play out. The problem is nobody wants to fund the research that shows how big of a global problem this is because it's going to be a very expensive problem, which is why, like with my research foundation, it's like, well, I'm trying to raise money to pay for my own research because somebody's got to do this. So it's such a huge problem that I'm really glad to see so many FDNs are embracing learning about mold illness and trying to help people heal.
I'm so glad that we have the time that we do today because I do like even if it's a tough one, I'm sure it's still to share. I like when you get to kind of go there and explain
Yeah.
some of the stuff that was going on. Um, and it allows me to go off on side tangents too, because it makes me wonder, like one of my favorite subjects outside of health is evolutionary psychology and just understanding humans, right? How do we
Yeah.
become the way that we are? And the reason that I mentioned that in addition to what you've already mentioned is because you said it's almost become cliche to use the phrase toxic relationship. Now, of course, most of us have been through some type of thing like that. Sometimes we've been the toxic person, sometimes we've received the toxicity. And I always wondered like what's happening here, right? Or for example, online, and this guys, this is actually validating and I'm not dismissing it. Like why on every YouTube comment section about psychology do you hear like I was in a relationship with a narcissist? Typically from women, they'll say that. It's like what why? Why does that happen so much? And well, I looked it up. And so turns out about 1 to 3% of males will classify as antisocial personality disorder. So narcissism is probably the least of your worries with those individuals. They have no empathy for you and I. And then, another decent percentage of males can fall in that narcissistic category. So I'm like, oh, and these are the people, by the way, that have no problem engaging in various short-term mating strategies and short-term relationships. So these are the guys that all think that they're worth the hottest girls. They go around dating all the time and then they cause problems. But it also happens on the flip side as well. You can have narcissistic women, you can have women with borderline personality disorder who otherwise might be fine people. These are absolutely not pokes at anyone who deals with this stuff, right? They're suffering with their own stuff as well. But it can come out as this. And then there's just those of us who are sick. And this is probably in the top 2 or 3 regrets of my life. I actually try not to live with many regrets. That doesn't mean I don't have a ton of learning experiences, but there's very few things that I think it actually serves me to dwell in regret. This does serve me. So I do go back to it every now and then. But in high school, the way that I treated the first person I was in a long-term relationship with, well, I might have a little bit of an ego, right? I'm assuming you have to have one to even want to host things like this. Unfortunately, I'm just being honest. But I don't think I'm a narcissist. I'm certainly not antisocial personality disorder. And I was the toxic person in that relationship, right? And this is not to excuse anything that anyone does, but I look at that, I'm like, oh, well, I was sick. I was out of control in every area of my life, and it was a sickness that manifested onto myself and onto other people. So, maybe you'll never know exactly what it was that caused those things to manifest in her, but hopefully it's just a reason or an explanation to give people some grace sometimes with this kind of stuff. It doesn't mean you have to put up with the behavior. That's completely different. But just trying to understand why some people end up the ways that they do. And the mold thing, kind of transitioning back to what we're talking about today, is particularly scary for me because I know that I talked to you about this already. I was exposed to it for a year straight, doing dress and all the stuff that we talk about as FDN as well as you can, but I was working inside, at least 10 hours a day. And that effed me up, man. That really got to me a little bit, both mentally and physically. And I'm doing the other things for years that I know to be doing. I cannot even imagine the people out there who are sensitive to these things like myself, who are living in the standard Western lifestyle. I don't, when this research does start coming out of the higher level, like you're talking about, I cannot even imagine what we are going to find in how this was implicated in various aggressive, the violent acts of men, suicides, other various health diagnoses. I think we have no idea just how much this type of illness is going to be involved with those things. And please correct me if I'm wrong. Am I misspeaking there, or do you think that is going to be the case when the research finally comes out that these mold illnesses were at least partially implicated in some like things that you would never think have anything to do with mold?
No, 100%. Like, even
Okay.
as you're saying that, I'm like, I'm pretty sure the Salem witch trials was probably like just a bunch of mold illness. Like, there's it's such a fascinating topic because I think this goes really, really deep and we don't have a clue. And unfortunately, with how health is being politically polarized
Mhm.
currently, I think it creates new obstacles from kind of a geopolitical perspective. But even, like the Salem witch trials would probably be a good example. Upper Northeast, like tons of mold and, living in wooden huts with, wood on the roof and everything. But then you think about St. Anthony's fire, which was 18th century. I don't remember the exact year, but over in Europe, and there was this population where they ate a bunch of ergot contaminated grains, and they started developing all these symptoms and illnesses because they were consuming these mycotoxins and fungal alkaloids. So this was kind of a historical well-known event that is, if you just Google St. Anthony's fire, it'll pop up. It was kind of an early documentation mold illness, but even, there's stuff in the Bible about avoiding mold and getting it out of your home. But I
Isn't
do
that
really
crazy?
like what you were saying about, I mean, the ego and compassion, which to your credit, I mean, I think you have a very healthy, grounded ego, because I think in, especially like literally it was during that relationship. I was 21 years old and she was 33, 34 with three children from two different men. So just wildly different places in life. And I had no idea what I was in or quote unquote up against. And I was a smart kid and maybe an intuitive. So it was during, this is like 2014. That's when I first was reading, Psychology Today
Mm.
about empaths and narcissists and toxicity. And here we are, like 10 plus years later, and now it's become almost too mainstream, and people are very quick to point the finger of, oh, you're the narcissist, I'm the empath. And there's
Sure.
a whole, nuance and subjectivity to it. But I also, the human ego can be the most destructive force in the universe, but it can also be the most powerful friend, servant, and ally that you could ever even imagine. So it's not
Mhm.
about killing the ego, it's about taming it and aligning it with your eudaimonic self-actualization goals and, using service as medicine. But yeah, I mean, the mold thing, I'm concerned about it because I really do think the powers that be, they're not going to spend the resources or time to look into how big of a problem this is. I was talking to one of my mold friends. She's a naturopathic doctor, really big in the mold space, very, very well respected. And, she was saying, she's like, Brendan, think about all the government buildings that are these massive, flat rooftop government buildings that are probably all water damaged. Like, imagine if the government actually like did the proper research
Mm.
and shows the amount of, essentially how expensive the problem would be, the workers' compensation, the remediation. So we don't really know how bad the mold problem really is. And of course, I think with the political polarization, as we as a functional industry get louder about the mold illness, we're going to get pushback of like, well, the research doesn't substantiate the claims, right? And so that's why I'm really passionate about teaching this information of there is a clinical framework that we can apply to navigate this, but it is a tricky thing to navigate, and there's a lot of layers to it.
Gotcha. And I already see some great questions that came in. I'm actually going to probably
Yeah.
um, get to those next. There's one kind of foundational thing I want to set up for us before we get into more specific questions. And again, feel free to throw them in, guys. But I kind of wanted to ask because this is something that's really fascinating about you. And if you only listen to like a beginning or middle half of one of your lectures or interviews, someone might think, oh, that's the thing. It's just that, right? But you're so good at the end always of bringing it in and being like, well, no, this is one piece of the larger puzzle. So I don't want to get too ahead of myself. I actually want to start there almost. Yes, mold, something you're super passionate about, still to this day, happy to teach people about, happy to, support research for it. However, just to be abundantly clear here, you are not suggesting at all that this is the only thing out there that is affecting people. I'm sure you might even make the opposite argument that maybe people focus too much on this one thing in addition to various other one things. So I'll pause there and kind of just frame it as how does mold get viewed in the broader sense? Because some people are now running it as standard testing. You might say, well, maybe you need a little suspicion for it first before doing that. I don't know. So where does mold fall into this broader topic of functional medicine as a whole? Should this be standard? We're always testing for it, or should it be something that we should be doing symptom investigation, lifestyle history investigation first before jumping into this form of testing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of layers to it, which is why I think the FDN methodology is the perfect methodology to be navigating this. Because if you're doing FDN the right way, the way that we're all trained how to do through the FDN program, there is a step-by-step process with this. We have to start with the foundations, and of course, it's a little ironic because my biggest passion is really biomarker analysis and lab testing because I like the objectivity, right?
Mhm.
My life is much more spiritual and philosophy based. My career is very science and research based, but to me, it's the same thing. Science is the objective pursuit of truth, whereas spiritual practice is the subjective pursuit of truth and meaning. Ultimately, truth is the goal. And with, I think, functional practice, we have to have objective lab parameters to really illuminate the path and figure out what's working, what's not, what's relevant, what's not. And I like the model that Reed created of the hidden stressors that are driving metabolic chaos. It's never going to be just one thing. You know, the whole industry has really evolved and moved past this idea of a singular root cause, as if, well, one thing is driving it all. It's just the gluten, it's just the glyphosate, it's just the mycotoxins.
Mm.
It's no, it's the net effect of all of the hidden stressors that are contributing to perturbed and dysfunctional physiology manifesting through the language of bodily symptoms. So it is a little, I have become very outspoken over the years about the mold thing, because I think it was around 2017, 18, 19 that the mold illness paradigm just exploded within at least the functional medicine holistic health space. But you know, humans, we get so excited about something, a new paradigm, and so we all jump on it, and then it's like, well, everything's mold, right? And it's like, well, as functional practitioners, we can't be biased, right?
Mhm.
There's no room for your own personal bias when you're trying to serve a paying client that is paying you good money to help them reach their health goals, right? So we can't go into it with this like, well, if you're a mold specialist, everything looks like mold. If you're a methylation specialist, everything looks like methylation. We can't bring that bias. We have to be impartial of meeting them where they're at and making sure we're doing that deep clinical intake of, well, based on the presentation, what could be playing into it, working through those foundational labs, optimizing the lifestyle foundations. And so something I often preach, and you know, I preach it in the course. I start the whole course with it of, we're all exposed to mold. We do not all develop mold illness,
Mhm.
right? With mold, it simply becomes this matter of, you know, what is the degree of toxic burden, how much exposure, how long, but also then in tandem with how resilient is this person to it, how
Mhm.
metabolically, immunologically resilient, right? So if it's a little exposure with high resilience, the likelihood of developing symptoms or illness is pretty low versus, you know, if the degree of exposure is quite high and the metabolic resilience and capacity detox is pretty low, okay, well, then it's likely that symptoms will start creeping up and illness will set in. But there is a very much an art and a science to qualifying mold illness. And the biggest mistake, as a tangible, clear, succinct example, is okay, you have a greener, newer practitioner and they're exposed to the concept of mold illness. And so they start running urinary mycotoxin testing on everybody, and immediately like, oh gosh, you have some mold toxins coming out, you have mold illness. And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, a bit of mycotoxin excretion does not mean they have mold illness. So we have to learn how to more properly qualify, not diagnose. This is not a ICD-11 diagnose, and we don't diagnose as FDN practitioners anyways, but qualifying the likelihood of mold illness and making sure that we're actually assessing the physiology to make sure we have objective physiological evidence that shows there's disturbances in the physiological systems, and then try and draw parallels between mold exposure to see, could this mold exposure be part of what's driving this physiological dysfunction?
Sure, sure. Well, very well said. And actually, Zoe said that too. It was to hosts and panelists. I don't know if you realize that, Zoe and Hey, but she said very well said, Brendan. We cannot afford to be biased, and that's the thing. I know that uh, you know this. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong. It's almost reframing it to we at least need to check in with ourselves to try to address the obvious biases, right? Because unfortunately, we probably are going to be subject to some bias to some degree. But at the very least, regularly checking in with ourselves and seeing where we might be at with that. Is this the same thing I promised myself? I was specifically talking about diet at the time. I was hearing all these stories at 18, 19 years old of people having like miraculous healings with diet. I said, you know, I don't really care which diet ends up working for me. I just don't want to become dogmatic about it when it does, because I did know people who had had tremendous stories with veganism, tremendous stories with paleo. Carnivore wasn't really a thing yet. Keto was becoming kind of a thing. I didn't care. I just wanted to get healthy. And if something else makes someone else healthy, God bless. That's fantastic. One other thing, I lied. It's important though. Before we get to the audience questions here, is you mentioned the course. Now we have some people on here that are just meeting you, just learning about FDN. So we wanted to announce this today too. We're not talking about the FDN program. The main FDN program is a very extensive training, guys. It's like a 10-month program that is for people looking to jump into this fully and really have a solid foundation on the functional medicine side. What we do also have are advanced courses. I say this every time. I almost wish that they were called intensives. Advanced implies that you need to go through FDN first to then advance to this. That is not the case. Our advanced courses or our intensives are available to the public. They all dive deep on usually one specific topic. They're rarely, 20, 25 hours. Sometimes they're as little as two, and sometimes they're upwards of 10 to 15, but they're all focused around one specific topic. So in your case, not only have you created many advanced courses for us, we have this new one now about mold illness. So can we just give kind of the summarized version of what it is called, what can people expect to learn from it, and maybe even some things that they might not learn from it, because maybe they'd be thinking they'd get a certain thing, but that's not actually what you're teaching. So let's just cover some of the highlights of it, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just that way audience isn't in ambiguity. So certainly, it is very well positioned for somebody that's graduated from FDN and is trying to get more advanced with some of these niche root cause subjects and expanding the clinical toolbox. But certainly some of you in the audience might be self-healers or graduates of IIN or some other program and wanting to become mold literate. So I was working with the FDN staff of we wanted this to obviously be a complementary advanced training for those that have graduated and in the AFDNP, but also for anybody in the industry that's working with clients and in practice that wants to become mold literate. So it's called the Mastering Mold Illness course here, the FDN Advanced Mastering Mold Illness. And it's about 11 hours in length. It could have been much longer, but I find kind of that 10 to 15 hours, that's the sweet spot. It's bite size, but it is very dense. I have been privileged of getting to meet and learn from some of the best minds in the functional medicine world. And certainly, I will say too, after I kind of met all the leading voices in that space and spending a lot of time in the SIRS, mold, Lyme, kind of complex chronic illness world, which is sort of a sub-demographic within the greater functional medicine holistic health space, I felt like there were a lot of issues and a lot of limitations and a lot of incongruencies. And it just felt like this, well, everybody's so complex and nobody's getting better and nothing's working. And we don't really know what lab testing. I'm like, this is a mess. Like this is a major mess. And with a lot of these people, it's almost kind of like there's two demographics. There's the people that are being negatively affected by mold and they have no idea, or maybe they're starting to get into it and find out like, oh gosh, this mold thing might be contributing to my illness. But there's also this other demographic of people that I really do feel they don't have mold illness, but they're being convinced that they do, which is equally problematic because then they're being conditioned of, well, you have mold illness and you have SIRS and you have MCAS and all these gnarly complex things, part of the chronic illness sequelae. And that can create its own nocebo response, which is essentially you're manifesting your own illness because you believe that something's hurting you. And so in this, 11-hour course, we go into all of it. We get really, really granular. So tons of research. I mean, you could ask Nicole, who's with us today. We had to categorize. There's an extra like 200 slides at the end of the course, so it's about a 400 slide deck. But I was like, there's no way that the audience is going to want to sit through all this research. So we tried to trim it down a little bit, but still left another 200 slides of peer-reviewed published research and just more tools. So the biggest thing, though, for me that I was trying to accomplish, I'm not the type to give somebody a protocol, right? It's like you give a man a fish, he eats for a day, you teach a man a fish, he eats for life. I'm the type of educator that I'm going to teach somebody how to build their own protocol because it should be bio-individualized based on the labs, based on the symptoms, based on the budget, based on the psychological preferences of the client. That's what it means to be a really good coach, is individualizing the experience to that particular individual. So teaching all the different tools of, well, how do we build a sophisticated mold protocol based on the labs? The lab section is definitely my favorite, though, because I think trying to navigate mold illness is really, really tricky in knowing which labs and which biomarkers and how to correlate the findings, how to look at, an environmental inspection or a ERMI test or a dust test or something that's inspecting the environment, during being able to draw parallels to the physiological testing, the blood work, the organic acids, mycotoxins, all the things. So I think if people go through the program, they'll see what I mean. It's very dense and people should walk away with a very full toolbox. And then it takes time and practice, obviously, of learning how to use those tools. Well, bust them out, use them, put them into practice, and you'll get better at using those tools as you go.
Awesome. And yes, we do have Nicole Kruger with us. She won't be on camera or audio, guys, but you will see her in the chat. She can probably drop some links for us here if you guys are interested in that. And now I'm going to finally get to some audience questions here. Thanks for your guys' patience. Patty, we'll start with you. You were the first one. Patty said, "Do we need a binder when killing off mold?" Obviously, everyone's case is different. I think, Brendan, you kind of just had a perfect segue to this, right? Because it's like, yes, the labs matter, the person matters. Does this person actually have mold illness? So humor me here. Let's just say, generally speaking, are most mold protocols going to include a binder?
Yeah, generally speaking, yes. And what I like though about the binder conversation, I put a post up on Instagram maybe like 2, 3 years ago that was like binders are the new multivitamins, and I was just kind of having fun because I do though. I think with the toxic burden that we're all being exposed to, whether it's the nanoplastics or glyphosate or bisphenols and mycotoxins and metals, all the things. I do think binders are a good thing for most people to be incorporating into their kind of day-to-day supplemental regimen. But the nice thing too, though, is I think with binders, I think we've gotten a little bit kind of siloed and dogmatic of we're thinking about charcoal and zeolite and humic fulvic acid and kind of these more traditional adsorbent binders, but probiotics could be binders too. So I teach that in the program. If there's a lot of different probiotic strains that can help bind and neutralize mycotoxins and fight off fungus in the gut, or things like serum bovine immunoglobulins or colostrum, or even just dietary fibers. So absolutely to binders, but there's actually a lot of different types of kind of binding and neutralizing substances that we can be using to get more broad binding capacity depending on what the toxic exposure is.
Awesome. I think this is just a comment, but I'd still like to read these. Again, I love these sessions because we just have the time to kind of get through everything. Current FDN trainee just finished module 6. Nice. Started off with Holistic Health Week. Okay, I do remember you too. So very nice job. You're moving right along. I had mold exposure a few years ago. I signed up for the last one, but I'm focusing on the course and will watch as I can fit it in. All right, cool. So just a comment, but fantastic. Jason, what is the best test or blood work to do to see if possible mold toxicity in the brain? So I don't know if it would be different for a specific organ in your body, but maybe we kind of touch on two questions here because this did come up as well. Like, what is the preferred testing method for mold in general? And would there be some specific way to look at it in the brain? I certainly wouldn't be aware of that if that's the case.
Yeah, so a really fun question for me. Nicole knows this because I did go into this in the course a little bit, and I'm really proud of how I built the lab testing section because it starts with the environmental, right? Because obviously, like, well, if we have, let's say, mold toxins coming out in the urine at high quantities, the very first question is, where are those coming from, right? But the problem is most people are, I think, overly reliant on urinary mycotoxin testing, and candidly, the quantity of mycotoxin excretion tells me really nothing about the person's physiology, right? Now, if they have a high degree of excretion, okay, yeah, where is that coming from? Are they currently being exposed? Is it ingestion? Is it inhalation? Is it a transdermal absorption? Is it an environmental exposure? Is it dietary exposure? Is it all of the above? Is it that, well, this is a previous exposure, but now because they're catabolic losing weight and pushing the detox harder, it's being excreted and it's been stored in their body for a long time, right? It almost kind of creates more questions than answers, which is why we have to use a lot of other lab testing and parameters to sort of qualify and objectify, well, what does the excretion mean? So somebody was asking about, well, what's the best mold test? What's the best mycotoxin test? I heard blood is better. And even with mycotoxin testing, and I teach all the options because I'm just here to fill clinical toolboxes as full as possible. So there are the urinary mycotoxin tests, and those are kind of the most common, but there are blood antibody mycotoxin tests as well. So instead of, the technology is different. I know the owner of that lab, where instead of looking at mycotoxin excretion in the urine, they're looking at immunoglobulins towards the mycotoxins in the blood. So more so, is your adaptive immune system responding to an exposure? And is that more historical? Is it more acute, depending on, is it IgM, IgG, IgA, IgE? Is it more of a mold allergy? Now, there's kind of pros and cons to all the tests, right? So the argument with the antibody testing would be, well, mold and mycotoxins can be immunosuppressive, which could potentially decrease the antibody production towards the mycotoxins, right? Now, in a world where like budget didn't matter, if you had like a really rich client, okay, then great, you can run all of the tests and get more clarity, because every test is going to give you a handful of puzzle pieces, but sometimes these complex cases can be like 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. So if each test is providing, 50 or 100 pieces and you run 5 of them, right? So it's just about trying to compile as many puzzle pieces, but ultimately the lab testing isn't a replacement for clinical critical thinking. And I say that a million times in the course. But so there's this whole art to it. And this is where, as far as the brain aspect, I touch on it briefly in the course because I created my own lab test and lab panel based on the work that I was doing around sort of this mold brain, right? That's kind of why I was really fascinated by mold, is when it comes to root causes of mental, neurological disturbances, I don't know that it gets worse than mold. Even somebody that is acutely, briefly, I don't know, staying in a moldy Airbnb, they can have a lot of brain fog and weird symptoms immediately, acutely, even if it doesn't really disturb their physiology for years to come. But it's just so neurologically toxic. Mycotoxins are very damaging to our liver, our kidneys, our gut, our cardiovascular tissues, but especially the brain is very, very sensitive to the noxious effects of mycotoxins. So that's where the mental map, which you read in my bio, that's where that came from, is I was really deep in the mold world, and I was basically trying to figure out, well, what biomarkers can I use to get more objective clarity on how is the mold affecting them, or other things that are driving neuroinflammation and oxidative stress and leaky brain and neural perturbations. So I did a ton of research trying to figure out what the best biomarkers are. And especially the final point to wrap this up is being able to have biomarkers that you can track over the course of time, and you're seeing them getting better in correlation with symptoms. Like, some lab tests are not great for that. Urinary mycotoxin testing is a great example of that, of the urinary excretion doesn't really correlate with symptoms very well. And we can't rely on tracking symptoms because symptoms can be up and down and all over the place, partially influenced by the person's psychology and their perceptions, right? Even if they're just getting a little stressed out or worried, they might get a little bit of a Herx flare going on. So I really wanted to figure out what biomarkers we can track to see over the course of time, is the neuroinflammation getting better? Is the bodily inflammation or the GI inflammation? Or, if we know from research that mycotoxins are so poisonous for the liver and the gut and the kidneys and the brain, shouldn't we be utilizing biomarkers that are reflective of how well those organs and tissues are functioning, right? Because it's one thing to have a ton of toxins coming out, but are those toxins actually harming the different physiological pathways or tissues? We don't have to guess. We can measure these things and then see if we're getting better as we're using our dress protocols.
That's awesome. Thank you. Great answer. All right, and that covers actually a few of these. All right. And guys, I promise I see some people in the literal Q&A. We're going to get there as well. Obviously, a lot more of you on than our first session. So if you are just tuning in, welcome. We have one more session for you guys today. Summer Open House is an awesome mix of clinical and business, because a lot of us need to end up getting in business for ourselves if we actually want to go do this as work. So we're going to be talking about email marketing of all things right after this. Going to be an awesome session. I love Mike Milner. And so we're going to end this one 5 minutes before 1:30 Eastern. So 1:25 Eastern, about 40-ish minutes from now, we're going to stop here. And I'm only saying the full 40 minutes because you guys just keep coming in with questions. So this is great. I think we will be here the whole time. We'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll be back on with Mike. All right, Brendan, what are your thoughts on the ERMI test?
Yeah, I mean, it's at this point slightly antiquated. I was just in San Diego yesterday and the past few days for the IFM event. And so my good friend Brian Carr, he owns a company called We Inspect, and that's just kind of the mold inspection remediation company that I work with. I have a great relationship with them for years. So anyways, why I bring it up though is, the ERMI is a little outdated and antiquated at this point in time. I mean, it's essentially collecting a sample from the environment and then running a PCR analysis to basically detect the RNA or DNA of whatever microbes were present. Now, it's still very useful. I'm not saying it's not. It's more a little goofy the way that it's the ERMI score is calculated, because there's section 1 and a section 2 of more the toxigenic molds and then more common indoor molds. And so you get this sum of the logs. And so the total ERMI score is basically a deduction of the common molds from the less common water damaged molds to give you a total score. And so usually like a score of greater than 5 is considered potentially deleterious for somebody's health. But to me, and I teach this in the course, I'm just giving cliff notes here. But I usually teach people if like, don't subtract it, if anything, add to it. We want to be assessing the total mold burden that they're being exposed to. But Brian's company, they developed, it's a similar technology. It's still using quantitative PCR, which is the same technology that the GI map that we all know and love and use. It's same technology, just instead of running it on a stool sample, it's running it on, they have they call it the dust test, and it's like a Swiffer. So you're going around your house and using that Swiffer to collect all of this dust from all these different problematic areas. And then they run the qPCR to look at, bacteria and endotoxins and different fungal species, and they report it differently. And what I like about their software that I actually just saw for the first time a couple days ago is they're able to upload those PCR results from the environment, and you can also upload like your organic acids or your mycotoxin test. Because ideally, for example, if you have like a ton of ochratoxin A coming out in your urine, which is the most common of the mycotoxins, ochratoxin A, okay, well, are you being exposed to a lot of aspergillus? So getting that correlation of what are you being exposed to? Because it would be a really big red flag, let's say, if like your ERMI or your dust test or whatever environmental test you're using, hurts me, came up with like really, really high aspergillus scores. If you're not excreting a bunch of aspergillus mycotoxins, like to me, that's kind of a red flag of like, well, we know that you're being exposed, so why are we not seeing those mycotoxins coming out of the urine? Are they clogged up in your body, which is just going to drive more inflammation, oxidative stress? So a lot of layers to it.
Sure. Another probably big question, and I think this should have been clear, but I'm going to say this right now. So anything that was already answered today, guys, is obviously not medical advice, nor is anything that's going to be answered today or on any summer open house event medical advice. And I only say that not because it's even a question that really requires that disclaimer, but Ashley asked if I can't do mold restoration right now, what can I do? She has an air doctor, and so we have to answer this somewhat generally, right, Ashley, because we don't know anything else about you. One thing sorry, Brendan, I have to mention this anytime someone brings this up. If you're talking about restoration, I'm assuming you wouldn't be restorating your entire apartment or something. You probably own the home. For anyone, though, that is a renter, I'm talking to the United States, unfortunately, I do not know the rules in other countries. 49 out of 50 states, unfortunately, Arkansas is the one that does not apply to this. 49 out of 50 states, if you are renting and you can show that there is mold exposure in the house, there's a little bit of a nuance to this, okay? It's not always so simple. You have more rights than you think, and make sure you take the time to do the investigative work to figure out what those rights are, because very often you're either going to be able to get out of the lease or you're going to be able to force the landlord to do remediation. Now, is the remediation going to be up to the standard that we might want it? Again, these are the nuances, whole separate conversation. But I have seen a lot of people been able to get out of leases fairly easily just by showing them that the mold is there and matters. So I just have to shout out for all the renters out there. If you're not in Arkansas and you're in the United States, I'm not saying it's easy, but if you're in like, a year lease and you're a month in and you realize there's freaking mold everywhere, take advantage of your rights. So I apologize for interjecting there, but in terms of mold restoration, assuming this person owns the home, they know how much it's going to cost to do the restoration. It is an insane amount for a lot of families. So what can they do other than just having high quality air purifiers?
Yeah, that side of things is where it can be really sad and pull on the heartstrings, because some people can be really stuck in a pretty bad situation. But I also, though, anytime I'm approaching that subject, I try to, you know, help people stay grounded and stay optimistic, because the last thing we want to do is sort of freak out about it or add any unnecessary fear or worry or stress. Like, yes, it can be very stressful. It can be a challenging thing to navigate, but trying to stay regulated, try to stay grounded, because do we know that it's driving illness, right? And so using a couple examples, my general manager of my business, she recently found mold in their new home. And it was so sad because they bought this new home, kind of an older like farm home out, a little bit more rural. Fortunately, her husband is a stud and super handy and knows how to do a lot of good kind of restoration stuff. And but I was trying to help her stay a little bit grounded of like, okay, you found some mold. I know that's not good. I know that's scary, but let's breathe, let's regulate. I don't think any of you are horribly symptomatic, so you're resilient, you can handle it. Our bodies evolved with mold, so
Mhm.
much so that even emerging evidence of the human microbiome, the fungal component of the microbiome, there's some emerging evidence of like maybe some of these fungal species, including mycotoxin producing molds, could be a normal part of our microbiota. We don't fully understand all of that yet. But my point being, our species has evolved for hundreds of thousands of years with mold, and with the occasional mold exposure, our bodies can handle some degree of exposure and detox it well. But, I don't like, first off, I hate on social media all the sensationalism and fear mongering tactics. You've been lied to. You're doing this wrong. This is going to kill you. Like, I just hate the sensationalism tactics for pulling people in with a hook, It's so obnoxious. And so you'll hear people say all the time, these influencers of like, well, you can't heal in the environment that made you sick. And it's like, I think there's a nuance to that should be acknowledged, because even if you're living in a water damaged home, there's still a lot that you can do to heal, even if the environment hasn't changed at all, right? Like proximity, right? If the mold is in a certain part of the home, spend less time in that area, right? Get away from it. Proximity matters, or opening up the windows, getting an air filter, water, filtering your water, taking some supplements, building up your metabolic health. There's so many things that you can do to build up your metabolic and immunological resilience, even if you're still being exposed. And I don't like the horror stories that you'll hear in the mold space where people are told, like, you have to leave your home, you have to live in a tent in the backyard, you have to, burn the house down. So we have to be very, very pragmatic about how we approach mold, and just because there is mold exposure doesn't necessarily mean it's causing a lot of illness or symptoms. But sure, if we want complete healing and we want to stay well long term, yeah, we should try to decrease the exposure. We should try to remediate, but it's very proportionate. So even in one of my previous apartments, there was a little bit of mold growing in the windowsill, and I tell these stories in the course briefly, but a little bit of exposure isn't anything to worry about. Or there was time that the vanity in my bathroom had flooded, water leaked, and so it just got molded out. But that was an easy remediation job because it's just ripping out the vanity. It's not like, deep behind the drywall or the studs and the beams and everything that hold the house together. So it depends. And this is where working with a really qualified mold inspection company is obviously essential. And unfortunately, most of them are not that great. So you definitely have to do your research and work with a reputable company. But I just want to acknowledge that point of whether it's the air filters or the supplements or using dress principles, there's so much that you can do to support your body's physiology and support your healing, even if you're still being exposed.
Yeah. And not that I'm not saying this didn't cost money, Ashley, but what I did, because we were in a position where the lease, by the time I realized it was mold that was affecting me, we were so close to ending the lease. It was just like, dude, just kind of finish it out. And also, I'm not going to get into the full story right now. Before we found the mold, we believed it was mold. And there's a difference between finding it and being able to show it to the landlord versus, hey, I suspect this because I'm waking up gasping for breath in the middle of the night, right? There's a lot of weird nuance to that. One of the things that we did is we just switched bedrooms, not because I even knew it was in that bedroom at the time, although it was a lot stronger in one of the vents. I didn't even know that. So I moved bedrooms. We left one of the windows open pretty much the entire night, and we kind of slept. My wife and I slept literally like right next to the window. Do I even know if that made any major difference? I don't 100% know that. I still had a lot of the symptoms while I was there, but I'm assuming if we had to stay for many more months or even years, then that's probably when I would have seen more of the differences versus like, all right, blacked out curtains in this bedroom that's clearly making me sick versus, okay, new living part of the apartment, right? Completely separate bedroom, windows cracked all night. We had the air purifier, all that kind of stuff. All of that came later. And I wasn't willing to do this experiment, but it would have been interesting to see what happened if I let myself stay in that new-ish version of that environment for many, many more months to see how much better I would have gotten. So always something to be done. And Ashley said, I love that you said this. I was told we need to leave and treat the home, or basically we are doomed. Staying grounded is so important. Great job. Okay, let's keep buffing some of these out. I'm going to go back to before. We have a lot. Let me go to the Q&A, folks, because I don't want to dismiss you guys. Is Brendan's curated blood panels shared in the new course?
Briefly, to speak to that, because I'm pretty transparent about it. There's a lot of long-term goals of what I intend on doing with the mental map, and the primary objective of that panel is more so to assess for neuroinflammation, leaky brain, and neuroimmunological disturbances. That was kind of the ultimate point, but the development of that panel, the research and development that led to me creating it was based on the work that I was doing with mold illness at the time. So that's kind of the origin story. So I at least like touch on that origin story. I don't necessarily go super deep into the mental map in the course, but I do teach or at least touch on some of the major biomarkers, like individual biomarkers that you can order through, Avexia or DHA or the medical director program or wherever you guys are getting your labs. So that way you know which biomarkers you can use to, hey, like I want to assess their liver function, or as a kind of a clinical pearl, kidney function, for example. When we think about lab testing for mold, usually organic acids and mycotoxins are kind of the first two things that come to mind. And those are taught in the program. It's great. I use them a lot. But literally, if we think about it for a second, of like, well, we know that mycotoxins are very poisonous to the kidneys in particular, and we're
Mhm.
using these assays that are using liquid chromatography and mass spectrometry to measure these analytes in the urine, which means all of those metabolites would have to be filtered and pass through the kidneys before we can even measure them in the urine. So I don't know, maybe we should assess kidney function. Like if the mold and mycotoxins are damaging the kidneys and causing a kidney filtration issue. So ultimately, I mostly just touch on the origin story of the mental map in the course, but then I teach a lot of individual biomarkers that we can use to qualify. Well, do they have neuroinflammation or immune activation or kidney filtration issues? So that way you can kind of piecemeal together your lab order for the client in question.
Awesome. All right, we'll keep buffing these out. Sorry, got lost my focus here. Okay, this is more of a comment, but I actually don't know of the literature on this. I'm not saying that there isn't. I'm saying I haven't even looked. But Kedzie said, I also want to throw in that mold and all microbes react to EMF with an extreme focus on survival, which ramps up its level of deadly toxicity, being our world is beyond saturated. I'm not challenging you, Kedzie. Again, I'm just asking Brendan because I don't know. Is that actually true that these EMFs can affect? I know it can affect certain microbes, but does it affect the mold stuff as well?
Um, that has popped up in the past like 7, 8 years, and I think like let's I want to be fair to this. It's all about evidence-based and being fair. We do have to keep in mind, like, I don't think that just because there isn't peer-reviewed published literature that really objectively proves with strong data and low p values, if we don't have that research, it doesn't mean that there's not truth to it, right?
Hmm.
For example, like with creatine, we have all this new research on creatine that has been done in the past, 5 to 10 years that shows, oh, well, actually, creatine's great for brain health, right? Just
And
because
anyone
we
using it could have told you that.
yeah, right. Well, exactly. So it's like just because we used to not have that research doesn't mean it wasn't still good for brain health 10 years ago. It's just the research evolves. So like with the whole EMF and mold thing, which I touch on in the course, there are a lot of people, practitioners that are of the mindset that, well, hey, these non-native EMF electromagnetic frequencies, not so good for human health. We have a little bit of evidence that suggests like, okay, it might drive peroxynitrite and oxidative stress and some of these things in our body. And if I'm speaking more candidly, do I think EMF is good for humans? No, probably not. I worry about it.
Hmm.
Do I think EMF could agitate other microbes, including mold? Sure, absolutely. That seems very plausible to me. Is it possible that, like, the example that you hear cited, which is sort of a subjective narrative, but it's like, okay, let's say that you have a child with autism and the Wi-Fi router is in their bedroom and there's mold in the bedroom. And, there is literature, and I teach it in the course on, well, children with autism seem to be more susceptible to the noxious effects of mold and mycotoxins. So then if you throw a Wi-Fi router into the mix, could it make it worse? Could the Wi-Fi stimulate the mold and stimulate the mycotoxin producing defense mechanism. I think it's all very plausible. Do we have really great research to prove it? No.
Mhm.
So I do think it's kind of one of those, if we use a little bit of critical thinking, I believe that there could be something to it, but I think it has become a little bit of a functional medicine folklore thing that we all sort of blindly agree upon, even though we really don't have the research to definitively prove that. So that's just my fair, honest take on it. Do I still unplug? Right now I've got the Ethernet because I want good connection for this
Same here.
interview,
Yep.
right? So I'm plugged into the Wi-Fi router, but do I unplug it at night to cut down on EMF? Sure. But so yes, I think it's worth trying to decrease the electrosmog a little bit, especially in mold cases, but the research isn't there yet. So we'll see.
This is such a big point that we probably could do a whole session on this, but because this is what gives our space more credibility, is when people actually go out and express these ideas correctly. There are a lot of things, and I'm not even, Kedzie, you just brought up a bigger point. I'm not even focused on that anymore, so don't think I'm going at you with this, because I don't know. I didn't know with this. There are so many things that come up where, like you said, it's folklore, and people act like it's a truth because they heard it from someone who posted it on Instagram, who said it on a podcast or whatever. And you go far down the line and you realize that the actual person sharing this did not really cite a source and didn't necessarily have one to begin with. And oh my God, I'm going to have the demons coming for me if I say this one. But oh, there is a difference between something that we do in functional medicine because we think it is likely an intelligent action versus I can back this 100%. So one of the ones, and again, don't shoot me, just prove me wrong. Actually, I would love to be educated and be proven wrong with this. So you guys send me the studies in the chat. I'm going to be on with you all month. There are not, from what I've seen, nearly enough studies in humans backing up the claims that are made sometimes on Instagram and TikTok about seed oils, for example. Now, do I eat seed oils? No. Could you pay me to eat them regularly? No. That is not the same, though, as me getting on Instagram and saying that they do these 10 very specific negative things to the body and not mentioning that I kind of just believe this or why I believe it versus people just assuming that this is coming from credible scientific evidence and me making these 10 very strong claims. And Brendan, I hope that you can prove me wrong. I just feel like with seed oils, that'd be another example of something that there's claims made online where I'm like, I don't know where you got that from. I have never seen that. I'd love to see it so I can make a better argument to my doctor, but I haven't seen that yet. So do you think that's an example of one, or am I wrong with that one? And there is more literature than I'm aware of.
Well, I'm glad we're having this conversation because like I don't subscribe to dogma. I'm kind of to the point in my life and I'm obsessed with objectivity. And that's why I started my own research foundation. My end goal professionally is I want to do nothing but fund, conduct, publish my own research, create my own data, because I'm seeking truth, right?
Mhm.
But I think it's important for us to, I describe it sometimes as I like to keep my head in the clouds and my feet on the ground. And what I mean there is I want to allow myself to theorize and philosophize and use critical thinking and intuition of like, I don't intuitively think EMF is healthy for humans or
Right.
anything else, but so I don't think we should just wait, which is easily going to take at least 15 to 20 years, assuming anybody even wants to fund and do that research, which is a whole other problem, or they do it ethically and the research isn't completely corrupt, right? So there are all these nuanced conversations, but I do think, and this is becoming even more problematic because of the hyperpolarization politically right now. But as a functional medicine industry, if we want to be seen as credible, we need to be more evidence-based and cite our sources. We can't make unfounded claims, right? That doesn't mean that we can't try to take prophylactic interventions of like, well, maybe cut back on the seed oil consumption or unplug your Wi-Fi router. But we do need to be honest of the state of the research.
Mhm.
And so part of my career, also to contextualize this conversation, I've done a lot of work with various nutraceutical companies and lab companies in the space around the regulatory. So the FDA and FTC, with FDA, they're more concerned about making sure that there's no companies that are making drug-like claims. You can't say that curcumin is as efficacious as ibuprofen. That's a drug
Sure.
claim, right? So the FDA is more concerned about drug claims. The FTC is more concerned about protecting consumers and making sure that companies are not making unfounded claims, especially for things like supplements that are made for human consumption, right? So the FDA and FTC is cracking down a lot, which means all these, supplement companies, nutraceutical companies, they have a regulatory department to make sure that their marketing claims are in alignment with FDA and FTC regulations, which means if you cannot prove with clinical research, if you can't substantiate the marketing claim, you shouldn't be making it, right? So I share that because there is a whole regulatory side to this industry. But again, I am very functionally minded, but it is weird, like with the seed oil thing right now, or there's another even hotter topic I dare not even touch right this
Oh,
second.
I wish we would, but fair enough.
Well, I mean, so one of my projects, I'm writing an ebook about autism, and it's kind of a functional medicine approach to autism ebook. It's like, well, I can't really touch on the topic of autism without sort of addressing the big V elephant in the room, right? But the thing is, like, I mean, I spend most of my time digging through research. I'm primarily a professional researcher at this
Mhm.
point. There isn't research to substantiate a lot of the claims, whether it's about seed oils or V's and jabs and all the things. It's like, yeah, I don't know. We need a lot more research, but I also then acknowledging kind of the corruption of research and who's funding and some of that stuff.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, here's my thing though. As a functional medicine industry, if we want to save the world, change the world, we have to be evidence-based. We have to be able to back up our claims. So I'll leave it at
Yeah, wow. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have had you ask that because yeah, we will be pissing
that.
people. But guys, just so to summarize this and keep moving on here, I hope you guys are enjoying the conversation though. The reason people don't want to go here is because it hurts to think, right? And we actually know it consumes energy. If you watch a grandmaster doing a chess tournament, they're going to burn between 4 to 6 thousand calories in that day while they're in that tournament. That's unbelievable, right? I mean, you're an athlete, Brendan. Think about what is your? Can I ask you what do you have to eat caloric wise to bulk? It's not 6,000, I'm assuming, correct?
No, no, not even close.
Yeah, yeah, right. It's probably up there more than the average person just because you've been strength training for a while. You're putting a high stress, but it's like what those people burn is nuts. So I'm kind of joking. I don't think it's literally because it's burning so many calories that people aren't doing it, but like it does hurt to think in some way. And you can hold multiple things true at once. We have to present it properly. And I think even more important is, man, when you're talking to our clients and they're brain fogged and they might not be as involved in this stuff as you and I, you could tell your client something is an anecdotal thing. They might not understand what that means though. Right. So they're taking what you're saying at face value, even if you explained and did your due diligence, be like, oh, this is an anecdote. Here are the differences. Um, I think we have a responsibility to really explain things and why we're doing them or suggesting them to our clients very appropriately. And to your point, I know Brendan well enough, just so for those that don't know him, I know you well enough that yes, the anecdotes out there of the stories of the people, the moms especially, that watch their kid transform after they got XYZ specific jab, we believe them too. That we're not denying that. It's just that might be a lot more complicated than just that singular event of that one specific jab. There might be a million other things that led to it, and that's why we can't prove it in the literature. And like you said, there is corruption. Monsanto's been sued. Now they're under Bayer, of course, but they've been sued successfully for having Stanford scientists ghost write studies for them. So that's true as well. Follow the science. Well, I don't know if I can always follow that. There's people buying out scientists, but these conversations hurt. Like it's literally exhausting to some degree to try to think of all these nuances. But if you're going to be in this space and you want to be the best practitioner possible, you have to do that. Needless to say, if I ever had a kid, I wouldn't be getting them an excessive amount of shots. They certainly wouldn't sleep near a router, and I wouldn't feed them seed oils, just to be very clear.
Yeah.
But that's not the same as me being able to get on a debate stage and prove all these things to the scientists that might be next to me on that debate stage. Okay. Um, wow. And we still have 19 minutes. Well, sorry. We have like 13 minutes. All right. Let's try to do some rapid fire if we can. Sorry. Carol in the Q&A, you've been waiting patiently. If you have mold toxicity and leaky gut, would you start by healing the leaky gut first? Of course, not medical advice, but would you focus on the gut side before the mold toxicity?
Yeah, I would primarily, and I go into this in the course, I primarily think of mold illness as The gut and the microbiota are perhaps the biggest variables that determine clinical outcomes in mold illness. Especially when I go through the course of like the microbiome conversation, right? Because it's one thing if you have some exposure, but then if you have some degree of fungal colonization, the sinuses, the lungs, the gut becomes kind of this harbor potentially for different toxigenic mold species at times if it takes up shop in residency and starts colonizing. So then it's like the mycotoxicosis, the mold toxicity could be more of a endogenous source. You know, the mycotoxins are being produced in your gut where there could be fungal overgrowth. And there's again nuance to how do we even really qualify that using, you know, microbiome sequencing or and organic acids and mycotoxin testing. But yeah, we know that mycotoxins can cause leaky gut. We know that the fungus can overgrow in the microbiota to some extent. So it's all part of it. It's you know, I saw a comment in the chat about, you know, people always want it to be like one thing. And it's like, well, we kind of have to work at everything at once, but absolutely addressing the gut health, the hyperpermeability is a major part. Like when I'm working with somebody with suspected mold illness, you know, the serum bovine immunoglobulins and probiotics and binders and gut support is kind of the very first thing that we're dumping in there before then we get too deep into like a detox effort.
Sorry, I put myself on mute because I was typing. My keyboard gets loud. All right, thank you. Carol, we're actually going to go to you next because you've been waiting so nicely. If oat test and stool tests do not show mold, but all the symptoms lead to mold toxicity, would you still address the mold? And you know what? This was from before. I don't know if you want to add anything to it, but I think you did effectively get to this, right? That sometimes you can do a urine test for mold, and that's not necessarily even going to change what you do for that person, nor does it necessarily imply that they have mold illness, right? But is there anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we do as practitioners, especially, you know, most of us are unlicensed practitioners and coaches. I think we have like the hardest job in the world in a lot of ways. And, you know, a lot of this conversation that we're having, something I like to ask myself constantly, and I like to challenge, you know, clients too on their belief systems at times. How do you know what you think you know, right? Like whether we're talking about some of the polarized, you know, topics of, you know, this side says this about the topic, this side says that. I think as humans, we're very impressionable, we're very susceptible. You know, we can be made to believe in just about anything, but I think we need to challenge our own beliefs over and over and over. We have to stay humble, we have to stay open, we have to stay curious. So how do you know what you think you know? Like if you think you have mold illness, how do you know that you actually have mold illness or the opposite, right? And so it can be tough because even with I teach this in the course too, but I believe the best practitioners are the ones that are most deeply acquainted with the limitations of the clinical tools that they're using in practice, right? So it's one thing to have like a basic understanding of some of these lab tests, but if you have a really, really deep understanding where you know, well, this one marker on the oat came out high, but that biomarker doesn't have as much research to substantiate what it really means. So how much weight of evidence, right? It's always weight of evidence. So even if, let's say, their stool test doesn't show any fungal overgrowth, organic acids doesn't really show any fungal overgrowth, mycotoxin test doesn't really show mycotoxin excretion. But if the clinical presentation seems very suspicious of mold, neurological issues, brain fog, IBS, joint pain, fatigue, depression, you know, skin issues, whatever it is, I mean, you can always that's what prophylactic intervention is. Prophylactic is in we don't really have the objective evidence to prove that we need to address this. So we're going to address it prophylactically. We're just going to go ahead and act like this is present and it is relevant. So let's try to address it with a more of a prophylactic protocol. And you can always subjectively and anecdotally see like, did it help? Are they seemingly getting better or not? But again, just how do we know what we think we know? I think that helps us stay closer to truth.
Awesome. Keep going right along here. Paula, how does a mold protocol look like in general, and how long does it usually take someone to get rid of it? Again, I kind of assume that one's hard to ask because there's probably so many things that could be going on with the person, but is there any way to generally answer that question, especially the how long does it take to get rid of it? That might almost be easier, even though both are tough.
Yeah, there's not really any good way to say how long. And that's something too, there's a lot to be said about defining the goal with your client. So I always do a SMART analysis with all my clients of what's their SMART goal: specific, measurable, attractive, realistic, timely. It's a coaching exercise I like to do with everybody because we have to get really, really granular on, well, how are we going to measure success along this healing journey? How will we know that you're quote unquote healed? So getting really specific of, for example, if we use one of the famous mold markers of C4A or MMP9, or one of the SIRS markers that a lot of people have heard about, like, is the specific goal that we're trying to get this biomarker from, let's say, 5,000 to 500, because that's specific, it's measurable, we can see how long it takes us to accomplish that. Because I like to have specific goals be based on objective biomarkers, not symptoms. Because if the goal is like, you'll never have any symptoms again, it's like, well, as long as you're alive, as long as you're human, you're going to have oscillating symptoms.
Mhm.
So I think it's really good to have more objective parameters, because then we'll have more realistic expectations. I don't think it's realistic to say, well, we're going to do a mold detox until you have zero mycotoxins coming out of your body. Because you might be really sick with mold and have no mycotoxins coming out because of poor excretion pathways. So we have to really be getting more specific to then set the timeline. But as far as like a general mold protocol, I mean, the way I usually approach it: probiotics, serum bovine immunoglobulins, binders, glutathione, there's going to be staples, some different antioxidants. That's like a foundational type of basic supplements. And that's on top of, things like multivitamin, fish oil, all of that. But can't really give a clear timeline because it's so individual as far as like how ill are they, how dysfunctional. It's probably going to be a little bit longer of a path to health.
Sure. You guys are great, by the way. This is quickly becoming like summer open house of last year, where there just ends up being so many questions. We're not going to be able to get to everything, but it kind of makes it fun in a sense. And remember, we're very lucky with Brendan because he's actually going to be on next week as well. So if something doesn't get answered, feel free to bring it. Dan, I promised you I'd answer this earlier, although unfortunately I'm banking on Brendan here because I don't fully understand the other guy's approach. So Dan had asked, what are the core differences between FDN's approach to mold detox and Dr. Pompa's approach to mold detox? I don't know what Dr. Pompa does and doesn't do. I just have a general idea.
Yeah, I've never met Dr. Pompa. I mean, I
Okay.
know our mutual friend Ben Azadi is pretty close with him, but I've never met Dr. Pompa, so I have no idea like what he teaches or what his approach is. But so I can't compare, but I feel pretty confident in the course that I just made for you guys. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't. I've been through a lot of different things out there, and I haven't seen anything that puts all the material together in this way. I'll say that.
I like the answer. The laugh was particularly funny. But yeah, yeah, and guys, Dan, one thing just from a total philosophy standpoint of or philosophical difference standpoint is FDN is, and I think it's a good thing. I think we are actually slightly more biased than most places, especially when it comes to things like mold, towards focusing on the lifestyle and the foundationals and making sure that is completely in check before just willy-nilly going in attacking the mold, if you will. Although we still recognize the importance of that. Again, I'm living proof of it, right? I was doing the dress stuff, had no ability to nocebo myself because I didn't know that there was mold in the house, and I was getting sicker and sicker. So, or the apartment rather. So it can happen, but I think we're probably the best at focusing on the lifestyle things first. All right, let's see what else we got. Guys, let me know. So I want to get honest feedback on this, and this is on me. I'm the one guiding the interview, so I won't take any offense, but I want to be making sure that we're setting up the month right for you guys. We only have so many interviews. There is a lot of presentations, but there's going to be enough interviews. Did you like this style today where we kind of get very conversational? We go off on our side things that we hope are still useful to you. Or if you'd rather us focus on the whole topic or the main topic the whole time, just let me know in the chat. So either give me a yes or focus on main topic. No problem at all. Either way, no offense. Zoe said yes, feels like talking among friends. Okay, that's what we like to go to. Yes, so good. Interacting is a plus. Main topic. All right, Patty, fair enough. Yes, yes, both. Yes, loved it. Okay, thank you guys. All right. Nicole has dropped in the chat. Oh, you guys got a 15% off thing for the mold course being dropped as well. So it's 15 off mold. And Nicole, sorry, I didn't mean to spam the chat as soon as you posted that, but we can feel free to post that again. And thank you guys for the feedback because I am reading this and it helps me out. All right, let's get like one or two more. And remember, we're going to stop this session at around 1:25, so like 3 minutes from now. We'll have a 5 minute break, and then we're going to be back on for email marketing with Mike Milner. So from mold to email marketing. But again, if you want to go do this work, and Brendan, I think you've expressed this to me before, even privately. It's not like you don't want to be some Fortune 500 CEO, but even you've had to take the time to learn some of the business stuff to really have the most impact that you can in this world of functional medicine and health. So it's something that we all got to learn, and it's all right. All right, Kersey, my mom dealing with anxiety and memory loss, and she is living in an assisted living facility. What is the best test to determine if she is being exposed to mycotoxins? So um, and I'm sorry, I don't think that was 100% clear to me because you did kind of say in a perfect world you do all of them, and I apologize, maybe I was in the chat. If you could only run one test though, in this case where her mom's in an assisted living facility, would you do urine or would you go blood?
Yeah, which a couple thoughts there. Something I think is helpful to delineate is more of like a screening functional test versus more of a clinical test. And what I mean by that is, are we using clinically validated biomarkers, as in like these biomarkers that we're running, whether it's blood or urine or stool or whatever, they have copious amounts of peer-reviewed published literature that prove the clinical significance of that marker. An easy example is C-reactive protein, just using something that we all know, we all love. It's the most widely studied, utilized pro-inflammatory biomarker ever. Now, it's not the best inflammatory biomarker anymore. We have newer biomarkers that are better than CRP, but you can't deny the clinical significance of an elevated CRP because there's so much research behind it that we know the higher the CRP is, the more deleterious and significant that is. As opposed to urinary mycotoxin testing has virtually no established clinical meaning behind it. And I present the literature, I cite all my sources, but there isn't proven clinical significance. It's a screening test, right? So personally, if budget was limited and I had to choose between, like a $400, $500 urine mycotoxin test versus spending that same amount of money on clinically established biomarkers, I'm going to go with the clinically established biomarkers. I'm more concerned about assessing their physiology and then supporting their physiology in a targeted way. I'm a little bit less concerned about the potential. Everybody's exposed to heavy metals. Everybody's exposed to mycotoxins. Everybody's exposed to viruses and parasites and, narcissists, right? Like we're all going to get exposure. The question is the exposure to the scary things, is it actually disturbing your physiology? So this is why I'm always preaching, and I preach it in the course. We have to track physiology more than chase root causes. Now, to give an anecdotal example, my grandmother, Nana, just visited her recently. She's 93. She's had Parkinson's for about 15 years. Literally about 10 years ago, I ran organic acids and mycotoxins on her. It was coming up high for some mold markers. We know that she has mold in her house in Pennsylvania, and nobody really cared. Nobody, my dad and my family, they didn't care. They didn't believe that mold was like contributing. Now, it's very difficult, whether we're talking in a clinical setting or research setting, it's very difficult to prove a causal relationship. We can draw parallels, we can show associations, but proving causal is very, very, very difficult. So, can I say that, well, the mold exposure is what caused my grandmother's Parkinson's? I can't say that. That's subjective, it's anecdotal, it's not evidence-based. But do I think that the mold exposure contributed to her degeneration and her neurodegeneration? Yeah, probably. So
Awesome.
food for thought.
All right, guys, we're going to have to hop off rapid fire. Nicole, can you please put in the chat how long the discount is good till? While she's doing that, Brendan, where can they find you? Because they can also find you on social, and you do a bunch of great stuff there.
Yeah, I mean, you guys can all find me through the FDN community, of course. I want to mention too,
Yeah.
it was kind of last minute, but we decided with this mold course, we made a free guide. So there is a free mold guide that I think the marketing team is finishing up, making it pretty like right now. So there will be a free mold guide, and there's also a textbook that goes with the course. I'm really proud of it. I think the textbook will really add, it's a virtual textbook, but heavily cited. I think there's over 100 citations in the whole book, but So you can check out the free guide, and then of course, if you want to take the whole course, but you can always find me through the AFDNP. I'm pretty active in there. And then of course on social media, the Holistic Savage on Instagram. That's my main platform. Metabolic Solutions LLC is the website, but I'm not too difficult to find these days.
Fantastic. If we can get a final thank you for Brendan, that would be awesome. Remember, he'll actually be on next week. I think he's the only person other than Reed in Summer Open House that'll be here with you guys twice. So if we could just get a thank you in the chat, that is great. We are going to take a rapid 3-minute break. I have to end this session. So Mike, that actually might be you here with us already. I apologize if it is. Just rejoin with us. We're going to get that session started, and we will see you guys in 3 or 4 minutes to talk about email marketing. Brendan, thanks so much, man.